I'm Leonard Nimoy. Join me for In Search of
An Argument.
Good evening, and welcome to In Search of an Argument. We are joining you tonight on January 20th. We all have thoughts on that, but that's not what today's episode is about. So this is Beth. I'm in Poughkeepsie, New York, and joining me tonight is John Heinz in Chicago, Jim Gentile in Brooklyn, New York, which we heard about recently, and Shelly Cummings in Indianapolis. That is where you are, right, Shelly? You're not in an undisclosed location tonight?
No, I'm in Indianapolis.
Can I add that
Sadly, Peggy will not be with us tonight. I think that's what Jim was going to add.
I was going to say that the reason is she got a full pardon from President Biden, and that's why she doesn't have to show up.
That was
tonight.
probably the only
Couldn't
person that
resist
didn't
it.
get a
Couldn't
pardon from
resist.
President Biden.
Speaking of politics, I
Yes,
just want to
Jim?
say to our vast listening audience, that we recorded an episode several months ago that has not yet been released, and I finally figured out why. Because in part of that episode, we discuss our feelings about the election results, and John Henley, like Mark Zuckerberg and like Jeff Bezos, cravenly is kowtowing to the incoming administration by suppressing that episode and refusing to publish it.
Wow.
Okay.
Were you aware of that,
Thanks,
John?
I was unaware.
Just like the
Good
other
fit.
big tech moguls in the country, John, you're
Yeah.
being cravingly submissive to
Yeah.
Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, that isn't what's going on here.
Sorry.
That is another narrative. But today we're going to talk, our whole episode is about counterfactual, which I had to look up
Ooh.
because I wasn't exactly sure what the word, I knew what we were talking about, but I hadn't heard that word used before. So these are hypothetical situations. We imagine the sort of what if I took the different path, if I made a different choice, what would life have turned out like? And everyone has those in their head, and some people spend a lot of time reflecting on those. One thing I found curious when we were talking about this episode is that one of the people on this podcast referred to it as regrets, which I didn't use that word because it's a path I didn't take. I took the path I took. So I don't view it as something, as a regret. So I'm curious to hear what the others have to say about that choice of phrase. But we're going to start with Shelly. Shelly apparently has had choices in which path she takes and has reflected on this and is willing to share some of these decisions. She was clear that not all of these will be shared with our listeners, but Shelly is willing to share some. So Shelly, take it away.
Yeah. Thanks. Jim wanted to get into the seedy underbelly of Shelley's life, and that's the part that she's not going to disclose.
I was only trying to boost the ratings, Shelly.
Yes, I'm sure it would, but yeah. So I have put a lot of thought into this, even before we thought about this what if scenario, and I generally think about that on a regular basis. It's not my like New Year's resolution kind of thing, but it's a process I've done over the years of what if I didn't do this, or what if I do that, and then what that naturally takes me down is what have I done in the past, and where have those past decisions lead me, to the left or the right.
Not politically correct.
No, not political.
Okay.
Nothing. No politics are in this. So when thinking about specifically tonight, the one thing that I thought about that happened that all resulted in this huge domino effect for me that actually impacts you all and my relationship with you, and you're gonna have to hang in with me with this little monologue here for a moment, uh, is when I was a senior in high school. Okay, I had very strict parents. There were school teachers in this small town in Indiana. Everybody knew my family. My dad was a teacher for 40 years. Um, and I couldn't do anything without it getting back to my dad. And one particular, I was a senior in high school. I had a car. My best friend, was dating a guy who was in college, who was lived in a different city, Winamac, Indiana. And he was home for spring break. And she convinced me to drive to Winamac for this big raging party. So we fabricated lies. I was spending the night at her house. She was spending the night at my house. We
Classic.
drove. Yep, we drove to Winamac and went to this party where there's lots of drinking, lots of underage drinking. Even though these kids
The
were home
best
from
kind.
college. Yep. Oh yeah, there's a lot of drinking in small town Indiana.
And in
Uh,
big city Washington as well. But go ahead. Yes.
yeah, that was like the drug of choice was
For sure.
drinking back then. And that's where I met my ex-husband,
At that party?
at that party. So he was a senior at IU, Indiana University, and he was a freshman at Indiana University, and he came home with this other friend. And I didn't like this guy. I didn't like the friend. That my ex-husband's name, we'll just go with B. Um, well, nobody's going to know him. He doesn't listen to these. Brendan was his name. And he was a friend, and he came home with Buckwheat, which was this guy's nickname. I didn't like
You're
Buckwheat.
not making that up, right? That
No,
is actually the name, right?
that was his goofy name.
Buckwheat.
Yeah. And my friend was dating other friends in that group. So I went reluctantly as the early stage Uber driver, I guess. Met Brendan.
You were the designated driver, right?
Yeah, well, I shouldn't have been, as I was drinking. And had a great time, great conversation, and that was it. Met him. It was spring break. I wasn't going to IU until the fall. It was just like this one night, meet, talk, have good conversation. My friend got to hang out with her boyfriend like she wanted to do, and that was it. So fast forward to fall of IU, and Buckwheat is at IU, and he has a party in his dorm room, and is like, come on, Shelly, you guys need to come. It'll be really, really fun. Come on, you can come. And Brendan was there.
In his dorm room.
Yeah, that's where you had parties, in your dorm room then. So we hit it off. So that was my first few weeks as a freshman at
Wow.
IU.
Wow.
So we met, had a great time, and it was good. And that's when the relationship started. It was good, but it actually, and I can say this many years out, it kind of ruined my entire college experience because I was so into him that's all I did. I only hung out with him. I stopped going to parties. I didn't do anything and I became disconnected from my friends. So here's where I went left. I was a really social person, really outgoing, and that all changed for this dude. And that is, in retrospect, I wish I would have stayed true to myself. Then the other side of that is hanging out with him, and then ultimately, I don't want to fast forward, but he exposed me to music, he exposed me to history, he exposed me to things that I just really wasn't exposed to in my small town growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, he lived in Chicago, so I, experienced a big city, visiting him at that time. So then I graduated from college, and my parents were really adamant that I get a job right away. Any job, you've got school loans to pay for, you're paying for your school loans. and I was offered this like environmental services biologist role, and the salary was like just terrible. I was going to have to live with my parents, which was like fate, almost worse than death at that point. And my parents are phenomenal people. It's just, I needed to be independent.
It's a little different when you're 22.
Yes. And I just didn't want to do that. So I moved to Chicago with Brendan. He had graduated the semester before I did, and I moved in with him and his parents.
So you didn't live with your own parents, but you moved in with his parents.
Because I was in Chicago, and I felt like I would have a better opportunity to find a job that I wanted there in Chicago with the medical centers and applying and all of that. So I had been applying to jobs, but I would have to drive back and forth to interview.
Mhm.
So, and my parents were absolutely against it. Absolutely. I'm raised Catholic. We weren't married, all of that.
But you were living with his parents, so it wasn't quite a total orgy scene, I assume.
Exactly. So if I had never gone to that party, I never would have met Brendan. If I never would have met Brendan, I never would have gone to Chicago. Probably.
Yeah.
If I had never gone to Chicago, I probably never would have worked at University of Chicago. If I had never gone to the University of Chicago, I never would have met Peggy. If I had not met Peggy, I would not have met all of you. And then I would not have the pleasure of doing all of these podcasts with you and having these great conversations.
So all these podcasts are Brendan's fault.
Somewhat, yeah, kind of. And Brendan and I are divorced. We got divorced after being together for 16 years.
Not 16 years of
total
being together,
relationship.
not the
Married.
When did you finally get married? Because you didn't get married.
I got married in 1992.
So that was
and divorced.
How far after college was that?
I graduated in 90.
Okay, so it was a couple years after college.
Yeah, and we got divorced in 2001. And the other part about all of this weave of relationships is Brenda's dad was or I think he's retired now, is a geneticist. He is the one that introduced me to my field that I am in.
Interesting.
And introduced me to the program that was at Northwestern. And that's where I went to graduate school to get my degree, my master's degree in genetic counseling, which exposed me to all these amazing friends, Joanna, who we've had on this podcast, and all of my other classmates. So again, if I hadn't met Brendan, I wouldn't be in this career, and I wouldn't have known this kind of field from his dad. And my career that I'm in now, I never would have published 5 college reader books or published manuscripts that I am, or had the opportunity to teach, all these kids and med students and things. With Peggy, I never would have traveled the world. I probably would have been back in Indiana, or I've been back in Indiana, but
let's review.
Yeah. Earlier on, not exposed.
Might never have left.
Right. I might never have left. And there's a lot of people that haven't, which is just fine. But I had an opportunity to experience the world. And then I do think that also gave me the opportunity to have a greater appreciation for my family and what they did for me, even though I disagreed with it a lot. The last
Distance
thing
makes the heart grow fonder.
It does. And the last thing is, if I hadn't met Peggy and we weren't as close as we are, and we both didn't like turkey burgers, and we both didn't like beer, I would not have met Ian, because we wouldn't have gone to the bar.
And Peggy wouldn't have been your wingman.
Yes.
Wing person, whatever the right term is.
Exactly. So it's like all of these twists and turns that impact your friends, your career, even though, having that relationship kind of ruined my college. People say college is your best years. My high school, frankly, were my best years.
Mhm.
And, college was my doing and the decision making that I made then. But it really shaped me the way I am now. Um, yeah. So, I mean, that's like my what if I hadn't done that? Then where would I be now? And why would I do that? And that's why I think exposing yourself to as many opportunities, even though you think you might not like them. I'm not saying get married and then get divorced as a thing, but that's a little extreme. But
Sometimes it works that way, though.
right.
So are other friends of yours from IU that married still together? And do you socialize with them?
So that best friend that I mentioned earlier. She is she married a guy from IU, and
Buckwheat?
no,
Oh, okay.
but he and I reconnected through LinkedIn a few years ago, and he's doing
Funny.
quite well.
Please tell me his LinkedIn name is not
No,
Buckwheat.
he tried
Okay.
he tried to drop that nickname as quick as he could. But there's some people that will always be their nickname or always
Yeah.
be their maiden name, and
Mhm.
he's one of them. But yes. So to answer your question, there is one. I'm not super close to her. She lives in northern Indiana. That was the best friend that I had in high school, and our paths just diverged. And that was the other tough thing when I, you know, leached on to Brendan. I kind of washed my hands of all my high school friends, and many of them were at IU. Um, so that was I'm really sad about that because there are
Mm,
some that are still like even in this Indianapolis area, but
mm.
there's some that I have reconnected with, um, and some that are good friends.
Part of why I like counterfactuals, or I mentioned before we got on Shell, before you jumped on Shelly, that I've been hearing a lot of counterfactual podcasts and shows and things, and the two that I mentioned was the two shows I mentioned was The Man in the High Castle on Amazon Prime,
Mm,
which was the Nazis won World War II,
yep.
and the other one was what was it? Is the War Against America? It's that one based on the Philip
I
Roth,
think it's called The Plot
The
Against
Plot
America.
Against
Oh,
America on HBO Max or whatever. And that's Charles Lindbergh won the presidency, and he was basically a Nazi. So they're both kind of right.
It's
I don't know.
probably
Whatever. That's the premise.
overstating the case, but
yeah.
Well,
that's
I don't know. I mean,
No.
I was just it's show. They're both good shows, but they're kind of factuals. And then I've just heard a lot of other podcasts talk about counterfactuals, and I was like, what is? I don't remember ever people talking about counterfactuals when I was younger. Like, I just don't remember it being a
Mm-mm.
thing. And I was like, why is that? So I did a little bit of a dive too into like why do people like to talk about counterfactuals? And I guess it's kind of been from what I was reading, it's kind of a trend in academia, partially because it helps highlight causality of things or
Hmm.
potential causalities, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But what does make sense to me, and Shelly, you proved it perfectly, which is when you think about a counterfactual, you often think about all the things you would have lost had you not done that thing. But of course, you would have done other things, and
Yeah.
and I think the fun, if there's fun in the creative process here, it's what would those other things have been? And I mean, would you be a farmer?
No. No,
I don't think
that
your
is too
parents
hard.
Would
were
you be a
farmers.
teacher?
My dad, we have a farm. We have a
Yeah.
Yeah, but your
180
parents
acre
were
farm.
primarily teachers, though,
Yeah, but
right?
my dad has done,
Yeah,
in his
no, I know that.
retirement.
I mean, I met
Yeah,
your
but
parents.
no. Yeah,
I,
I wouldn't. I mean, I do have teaching in my blood for sure. I love to teach and have the
Uh-huh.
opportunity to do that in other avenues. Could I do what you did? No. Could I do what the teachers have done and the way the teaching education system is now? No. I would probably be in jail because I would punish people. I know.
That's great.
But I
Well,
mean,
so what would you have done? So what do you think
think of the other
what might have
friends you would
happened?
have made in jail, Shelley.
right.
Yeah, Martha Stewart.
Well, I was struggling because I had a biology and a psychology degree, and I think it's easy for me to say this now, but I was so like pre-med. I need to go to med school. I need to go to med school, and it wasn't well until
Everybody.
it wasn't until I was at University of Chicago and I saw how academic doctors were treated and the stress that they're under, and they have to grant this. I was like, yeah, I don't want to be a teaching doctor. That's tough. That's not, and I'm not lazy. It's just that, okay, I really got to see what I thought I really wanted.
Mhm.
Um, so I would think I would have probably gone down the psychologist route, and or maybe the counseling
Mm.
aspect of
Mm.
psychology, because I like trying to help people or get them to talk through
Sure.
things. But I can say that now because I've had that genetic
Sure.
counseling training experience, and I've lived that, and I've mentored. And so it's kind of hard for me to go back to my 21, 22-year-old self to think what I might do. I mean, I was very close to taking that environmental biologist degree to have the money, not to disappoint my parents.
Right.
And I know I would have been miserable. It was
Right.
a huge leap for me to go against my parents' wishes.
I have several. I have many hours of questions, Shelly,
Oh
that I want
boy.
to ask.
Okay.
So let me ask. First of all, I think we've talked about this once, probably not on a podcast, but if I recall correctly, you did not have a lot of dating experience in high school. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, I guess it's how do you define a
Fair
lot?
enough. Fair enough.
I had a handful. Yeah. I mean, I had here and there. I had a boyfriend who was killed in a car
I
accident in
remember you
high
tell
school.
that story, and I was
Yeah.
wondering if that was the story you were going to tell because obviously that seems like very traumatic, and the what ifs of that are.
Yeah,
But
that
but
probably would I could have predicted that relationship would have fizzled out
I
after high
know
school.
when I
Yeah.
remember when you talked about it before, you didn't seem to think that it was all that you weren't all that crazy. It's not like you were crazy in love with him or something.
I
When
think I think I thought I was at the time because
Mhm.
it's high
yeah
school,
yeah
and a boy
yeah.
likes you and all of that, but I don't think it was like this forever. Like my sister's married to her high school, a guy she dated in high school, so it was not like that. Um, so I would say not. And Brendan had never dated ever, ever.
Mhm.
Ah, that's an important piece.
Hmm.
So it must have seemed at the time, and maybe it does feel different in retrospect. It must have seemed at the time like a very intense relationship you and Brendan were having while you were at the Indiana University.
It was, and that's the kind of at the time the beauty of it, but it was also the dysfunctional
Mhm.
aspect of it. I mean, we definitely had friends, and actually the best man at our wedding, I'm still really good friends with. He's like like almost like a brother. Like I'll call him if I called him early on when Ian and
Hmm.
I started dating, and I'm like, are these red flags, Chris? Should I think about these as red flags? Tell me, and he was very kind, and he's always going to have my back.
Mhm.
But and that's the only connection that I um,
Yeah.
have there. But um, yeah, I don't know.
So I think that a lot of people, especially when they're young, have a hard time when they get into a quote serious relationship balancing that with their other friendships. Maybe not everybody, but I think a lot of people go through that. Like
Yeah,
they become sort of very consumed by this relationship. It seems very, I'm not saying it's not important, but it seems like intensely important to the exclusion of everything else almost.
I think I would agree with you, and I also think it was a little bit of the role models that I had. My mom was is very subservient, submissive, and a kind of the era of you go to school, you get married, you have children, like that traditional old fashioned way. And I fell into that. I definitely did. And I even had friends after I got divorced who said, "You now are finally yourself. You are coming out at your shell. You're much more outgoing. You express your opinions more." Um, and so I kind of just changed to be that perfect 1950s wife or person. Um,
Hmm.
and I honestly, I can say that I kind of continued that with some other relationships that I had afterwards, even in the dating. That is not the case now.
No,
Just
that was going to be one of my questions is how do you recognize what you want to change and then have the courage to change it? So good on you.
You
yeah.
get married. That's how you do it, and then you realize you're married, and that's when you realize you made a huge mistake. Is that what basically correct, Shelly?
It's a little. It wasn't a mistake because even, to John's comment earlier, I also recognized the things I gained out of that
Hmm.
because I mean,
Clearly.
my interest just mushroomed, and maybe it was also a part of growing up. But the whole into music and love of Bob Dylan and Rolling Stones, and we weren't like in my house. We had music on, but it was like whatever was on the radio. It wasn't like okay, let's listen to Neil Young's album, like or it was none
Hmm.
of that. And
Hmm.
um, so all of that I was exposed to in a way that I'd never had been before. Real food. Sorry. I just like, my pizzas were Chef Boyardee out of a box.
Hmm.
Right.
And
Right.
so and I'm not saying like the five-star pizzas at or restaurants in Chicago, but just like it was just a whole nother exposure to life that I didn't have. So those
Well,
are the good things.
speaking for myself, I'm glad Brendan brought you to Chicago. Um, so the other, the that's another question though is part of I think especially not always exclusively, but when people are younger, I think part of the intensity of that is a reflection of a certain insecurity. No, like maybe uh you're not experienced, and also there's a certain like, oh, I really have to hold on to this person kind of thing, aspect to it.
I think that's true. I think, definitely as we get older, we're much more confident in general and have a higher self esteem in general, feel secure about who we are in the world. And, certainly in the 20s, um, I didn't have that. And probably well into my 30s, I didn't. I think, that's why you pour yourself. I did, poured myself into work and worked a lot of very long hours because that's where I
Hmm.
found success and happiness. And I also did in my personal relationship, but it was so isolating. Um, and so I frequently have said that, I wouldn't wish divorce on anybody, but for me, it was actually the best thing that happened to me because I out of this cocoon and came back to myself again.
Hmm.
Has your perspective on the divorce changed over the what it's been 20 almost 25 years now?
Yes. Um, well, of course, afterwards, I was very, very sad because I fought to keep the marriage going for a lot longer. Um, and it took a while to get out of that. And then I just dated like a fiend afterwards. Just like,
Let's talk about that.
That's the episode Jim wants to
right,
do,
right.
Shelley.
Just like, in
Dated
fact,
like a fiend.
so
Okay.
people have told me I should write a
Exactly
book.
how do fiends
Oh,
date,
you should write a
Shelly?
book.
I
There's no question about that.
should
I want to
write a
read that
book.
memoir.
So this
Yep.
is Chicago in the 2000s,
Yeah,
basically, right? Okay. All right.
yeah, it was crazy town. But I had fun. I'm safe.
You're
No
alive to
no
tell.
diseases.
Live to
Hmm.
tell, as
Yes.
Madonna would say.
But it was crazy. And so I guess through all of that, I learned what I want and what I don't want and what I'll put up with and what I won't put
Hmm.
up with. Um, and even the relationship that I had before Ian that knocked me down several pegs because I thought I was in the right place. I thought I was doing the right thing. Even looking back, I was like, I still wasn't solid. I still did some things from my youth that I shouldn't have done. It's just a gradual slide into. I said I wasn't going to do that, and I found myself there. Um,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah,
You
so it
become
was
your parents.
yeah, yes. So, I mean, that was kind of when you thinking about this counterfactual, which might be slightly off target. I was doing more of like the what if.
Yeah.
It's the
and
same
then the
thing.
cascading.
It's the same
Okay.
thing. But my next question is to Beth's intro on the question. Do you consider yourself a regretful person, Shelly?
Good question.
I don't. So I don't. I don't. I mean, let me think. I think I made the choices, or if I didn't make the choices as wide eyes open as I should have, I still try to learn from them. And that's why I
Mhm.
said in the beginning, I try to like think, what did I do last year? And sometimes this has to do with my team that I lead. Like, what did we do that worked and didn't work, and what we can, start, stop, and continue kind of thing. But I also try to do that as an individual. You know, I've been losing some weight over the last several months, and I'm like, okay, what did I do that worked? What did I do that didn't work? Why do I still have my fat clothes in my house? Let's get rid of those. Let's get rid of the stuff that's in my like I stop and do some of those things individually.
But that's not regret.
It's not regret. I don't
Yeah.
regret it. Yeah, it's I guess it depends how you look at it. I look at it more as what can I learn from, even though, and not regret it, because I made the
Mhm.
decision. You have to own it. I mean, I
Right.
guess.
Beth, how do you think of that? Do you think of this as an episode about regret?
No, not at all. That's why I was surprised in our group text that it was talked about like things you regret or a decision you regret, or because I was like, oh no, I mean I've a great example, but I don't I went on this path. I met you guys. I mean, I would have had a different life entirely if I had made a different decision.
Which
But
decision?
so I accepted a job in Croatia. I was going to move from Thailand to Croatia. And it was after September 11th, and my parents called me. I'd already accepted the job. I was figuring out how to ship my stuff there. I
Mm-hmm.
was interviewing the staff, figuring out what the office needed. And my parents called and said, we've, two of your brothers are in the military. The US is a really crazy place right now. We want you to come home.
Mm.
And I knew how hard it was for them to say that. And I basically moved to Thailand to be entirely selfish and take care of myself. And so I'd had 2 years of just bliss of being 12 time zones away from every competing, pulling, tugging thread of my family. And so I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, I think we're here for our families, as dysfunctional as they may be, as crazy as they might make us. At the end of the day, this is important. So I turned down the job and moved back.
So what's the
Move back to
counterfactual
DC.
Yeah, back to DC. I think if I had stayed
in
in
Croatia?
Croatia, I would have just been an expat for the rest of my life. It is a glorious, glorious existence.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh.
John
And
is
I,
John is getting very excited just thinking about being an expat.
It's great. It's a great
yeah,
life. For,
it's
for anyone who
really,
for anyone who has passion for kind of culture and difference and just things that are contrasts, it's just a daily joy. It's a
it's a
constant.
daily joy. You're challenging yourself. You're
Oh yeah.
learning new
Oh yeah.
things. You're
Yeah.
realizing that at the end of the day, we're all
Yeah.
kind of the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would have stayed an expat and encouraged people to come visit and traveled and probably not come back to the US for a
Well,
long,
how
long, long,
how
long
would it have
time.
changed you?
Because she wouldn't have met me, which
Well,
pretty
exactly.
Oh,
much,
I didn't
Oh.
realize you came at after you
Yeah.
came back from
So
Thailand.
I came back
Wow, I
in
didn't
and
know
June of
that.
I pretty much
2002.
ruined her
Okay.
life, but she
So
did meet you guys
she's
through
trying to
me.
go to
So
Croatia now.
sort of like Brendan, I kind of ruined her life, but she still met you guys ultimately.
But she
So it was,
doesn't regret it.
yeah.
So then I started at the National Labor College in December of 2002, met Jim, had the best job I thought I'd ever have. I mean, I just loved working there.
I
And that opened me up to actually what I'm doing now, the adult learning and training and credentials. And so, yeah, it's totally different life, but I have just amazing friends from all the jobs I had once I got back to the US and started working here again, and got to see my girlfriends and cousins and my sister have babies and be part of their lives. And Yeah, so I don't have a single regret about I didn't go to Croatia. My life would have been blah blah blah. I probably would have like fallen in love with some hot Frenchman who was an asshole and had a good
Croatia's
story
loaded
to
with them.
tell, but yeah, so it's one of those total like
How tall would
absolutely.
the Frenchman have been?
Well, I'm not tall, so I mean, really, like
You don't care
5'10" works
about
for
that,
me.
right? Yes, okay, right. That's right. You don't care about the tall
Right.
thing. As long as they got to be reasonably smart, though, right? I think that
Oh,
should
you have to be smart.
yeah,
Good teeth, important.
Good teeth.
smart, good teeth, generally good hygiene. I think is important with you.
Yep, it's important.
Yeah. Um,
Well, that sounds a little bit like a regret because, in a way, I know it's not a regret, but if the core of regret is like you would have loved it, it would have been great. You're saying you would have loved it, it would have been great.
but I think she's also saying she loved how
Yeah,
the
I
other
she
love
loved
what
How
what
it
Croatia
came
turned
up
is.
out.
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
still travel all the time, and I still have friends
yeah,
who live in other
Right.
countries that I go visit, and yeah,
You found
it's
another
I have to
way
tell
to
you
do
that
that.
yeah.
when Beth came to the National Labor College, uh, I had already been there for a little bit, not too long, for a little bit. And the National Labor College, I totally
You,
agree with Beth. It was the best place.
you should give a
And
little background about that, just
okay,
like
so
a
the
couple
National
sentences.
Labor College, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore. But the National Labor College, which was originally called the George Meany Center for Labor Studies, was a nonprofit that was founded by the AFL-CIO as a place for labor education, which evolved into an accredited college called the National Labor College, which offered an opportunity for people who were affiliated in one way or another with labor unions to get a college education for very inexpensively. And in many cases, a lot of the people that got their degrees at the National Labor College were the first people in their families who ever get a college
Mhm.
degree. Um, it was wonderful. Some of us who work there, who are obviously biased, think it's exactly what the labor movement should be doing in this country and still be doing in this country. And there's a lot of complicated reasons why it's no longer in existence. I don't want to weigh you down on that. What I was going to say is I had been there for a little while, and it was a wonderful place because I thought, and I think Beth agrees with me, the what we were trying to do was really a great thing. By and large, most of the people there were good to work with, all exceptions. Um, and for a good chunk of the time, we not all the time we had a tremendous leadership that we worked for. We had some great people that we worked for. What I was going to say though is that like
When Beth showed
every
up.
like every institution,
Yeah,
there was all sorts of internal politics.
of course.
I mean,
Of
so I'm not
course.
going to, I
Of
mean,
course.
I could literally do 10, 20 hours on the internal politics.
Right.
But for whatever reason, and I'm not going to go into it, when Beth started at the National Labor College, she and I were kind of uh, just by pure happenstance, were on sort of the opposite political factions among the factions. And, but what was the great thing was that Beth uh, was one of those people that really just wanted to get the work done and didn't really have her own agenda for getting stuff for like what she was trying to do, which unfortunately, again, not unique to the National Labor College, but there are lots of people who have their agendas, right? And I mean, you just have to accept that on some level. Although there are people who have their agendas that really gets in the way of trying to get the actual work done, and that becomes problematic. But anyway, it was great because it was great working with Beth because she was really terrific and she didn't have an agenda. And so it was actually great because we were able to get quite a bit done.
Mhm.
And we worked together very closely, and that was terrific. So I'm glad you didn't go to Croatia, Beth.
Well, and
Uh,
Beth, did you feel like because I just when I always equate going abroad and then coming back, going abroad for a long time and coming back to like home. Home is the entire United States, if not like all of the Americas. Like home is the whole country, and everything is so easy and lighthearted that you can just kind of be that easygoing person at work who's like, let things slide off you because it's all so simple? Or do you think, Jim's shaking his head. So he's like, no, this is her nature. But I'm curious if there's any connection to the having been abroad and made the decision to come back that actually ties to what Jim's talking about.
No, the actual like living and getting around and all that, way easier in the US. Absolutely. The work, in some ways, it was a different kind of complicated at the labor college because you had, like Jim said, you had these factions and you had people that assumed you had an agenda or had a story about you, and I wasn't used to that. Like, you work overseas and, like, obviously I totally acknowledge my power as a white American woman, the funder doing the work. I had power. So I had a different dynamic at work over there. And, basically people were going to do what I wanted them to do if it's within reason. It doesn't, I mean, the work was complicated. We had a partner who was assassinated. I mean, we had serious shit went on.
Wow.
So yes, obviously way easier coming back and working in the US. But just that, as Jim said, the nonsense, the games, the sort of manipulation, I was like, oh my God, you people have no freaking idea what goes on in the real world. Get over yourselves. Are you kidding me? It's going to take 18 months to refine a curriculum? Are you insane? So yeah, I had no patience for that sort of nonsense. I was like, go have a real job and then come back and tell me what's going on.
Was that new when you were at the labor college, or were you always that way?
Oh, I was always that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, I think that is one of the,
that's
the
Jim's
great,
point. Okay.
interesting things about. So I first got to know Beth, at work, obviously on a work level, and then we gradually became friends. And what is fascinating to me about Beth is that she is very, very good at her job and very, very not like humorless, but she's very, intense at work. She's like really serious about getting the work done, which is great, if you're trying to get work done. But you don't always think of the other side of Beth, which I've gotten to know, that you wouldn't always necessarily expect it if you just deal with her in a work situation. And I've said this before, and I think this is true of all of you guys, is that you're very good at both working hard and playing hard, which, is not, I don't think everybody in the world is good at that, but you guys are.
And you can go back and listen to that episode that we did on In Search of an Argument
about that, yeah,
if you want to hear more.
Yes,
good plug.
Nice.
I love it.
Anyway,
plug.
Very good. Can we find those episodes? Are they available?
They're all
Yes,
available.
they are available. If you go to Apple, wherever you get your podcast, you can find In Search of an Argument.
So this means we don't have to do the closing now anymore. So I have I'll ask another question about that. I think that's interesting. John, now I remember you at one point very much did not want to come back from Europe.
I never wanted to come back from Europe. I always had to come back because I couldn't make enough money to live on there.
Yeah.
I never could earn a living. And it was so easy to make money in the US. It was just so easy. You could just show up and they paid you. It was like, I mean, I was a hard worker and I was good at what I did. And I was very dedicated, committed. But yeah, no, but it was, career paths were easy. I mean, part of it was the visas and things like that. So things that were larger than the job or one's nature. But no, it's easy to make money. I love Europe.
But then if you'd never come back from Europe, you never would have met Ted. You wouldn't have.
My counterfactuals are all over the place. I mean, I didn't think about counterfactuals, but I didn't think of one for myself. But
that seems like an obvious.
As you guys are talking, I was suddenly like, I was thinking, and I didn't know if this works for the counterfactual, but I figured why not? It's just a counterfactual. Is if I wasn't gay, if I hadn't been born gay, and that opens Pandora's box for a million things because it's been the most unquestionably the most categorically important thing in my life. And so that's one. But then I also thought about little things, like if somebody, I have this, I usually tell this story. I don't know how to tell this without it being seedy, but I'll just go for it. I remember, I mean, and it's related to being gay, but I remember, if in this growing up gay in the 70s and 80s wasn't the easiest thing. There wasn't access to information. I remember finding a gay, once I was out in the working world as a 24-year-old teaching, I found a gay clinic. And at that time, the gay clinics were basically AIDS clinics, right?
Mhm.
They were clinics
Yeah.
because people with AIDS couldn't get treatment. But this clinic is still around, and it's transitioned to just being kind of a gay community clinic, and they have doctors. But I went to this after, it was kind of at the end of the time of AIDS. But I remember going in, and I remember feeling like worried about something that I had done over the weekend that was fairly terrible. And I remember I was like, I'm with my doctor, and like, you tell your doctor, your lawyer, and your banker all the truth. You never lie to them. So I went to my doctor, and I just said something, and I will never, ever, ever forget this doctor's response. He looked at me and said, "Good for you."
Oh.
And I think that was one of the, so that's a kind of that I thought about that as a potential counterfactual. What if he hadn't said that to me?
Mhm.
Like the one little line, because that I carried that for decades.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Because you didn't get affirmation. You didn't get, and certainly didn't get affirmation about the thing that I'm not going to tell you I did that I told him I did. But it was like, yeah. So I
I'll
don't
say
know.
what it
Counterfactual is a
was.
little big.
No, I'm just John, I have a question for you because I totally get what you're saying about the being gay being like sort of maybe the most important fact of your life. Um, I don't know, and this is a good question. We should ask some younger people. I wonder if that would have been true if you had been born 20 years later. I
I think
don't
that
know
too.
that that's as true because of the times we live in. I think now that, and I could be wrong, and we should talk to some people who actually could answer this question, at least for themselves. But I wonder now if that it's easier to just be gay without having it being such a thing.
Well,
I
going back to
still
Shelley's counterfactual and the marriage, I guess going back to marriage and divorce, the there is just that's the other big counterfactual I'd bring up, right? I didn't meet Ted and I didn't get married, or gay marriage didn't get legalized, right? I
Mhm.
mean, any one of these series of
Yeah.
things, probably more like I didn't meet Ted because we would have probably just made it up. But I asked myself about that too, and I can tell you the thing, Shelly, you were talking about where you had, and I'm going to use my own term, you got a lot of social capital from being married, and that there's a path that it takes you down and it kind of moves you there, and you become this thing, and it's
Mhm.
just like a thing.
Right.
And you're in it, and it's a culture, and there are forces on you that keep you propelling down that path. That is so true. That is just, and as a gay man who got married, that is even more true. I mean, it is like I can name countless stories of like cousins who I didn't used to talk to, but when I got married, suddenly they wanted to get together for lunch all the time. And
The club.
I mean, just things
Yeah.
that just come up
It
all
gave
the
you
time.
respectability, John.
Oh gosh, the social capital you get from marriage is enormous. And so I have great respect for people who fight it or don't do it because, or avoid it, or even divorce from it, because I see the pressure in it even today, the 1950s, the pressure for that kind of marriage is out there. So
But the other part to
feel it.
that, John, is the tremendous amount of pressure once you're married to have children. And if you don't have children, what's wrong? That you're
Mhm.
supposed to. That's what you're supposed to do, particularly getting married in a Catholic church. That's the whole point of getting married. Like that's, and then
Yes.
you're looked at kind of as a pariah, like, oh, we're going out with this couple and their kids, so and you don't have kids, and so that's a whole nother club that gets created. I did want to say something to Jim's comment about 20 years later would John have gotten the same. There's still a tremendous challenge now with acceptance of in the medical community of the care for alternative lifestyles and decisions, and not honoring pronouns should they be corrected, and all of that. So it's there's a and it, that still exists now.
No doubt. I no doubt. But
Yeah,
it has changed, I think. But
I think it.
again, that's
Yeah.
really something we should talk to my son John and see
Yes.
what he would say, because I'm sure, he was born essentially 23 years after you, John, or 22 and a half years after you. And I'm sure his experience is different, but, it doesn't mean it's all
Not where
easy.
it should be.
Yeah. Well, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
And Jim, you're kind of a long arc of history guy, I think.
I don't know what that means, but
You remember that? Was it Obama who said that line? That there's the long arc of
that
Well,
actually no,
history.
he quoted it. Martin
MLK,
Is
wasn't it?
it
MLK
Fukuyama?
actually was quoting somebody else, but I
Okay.
Oh,
don't
it's
remember who.
pre-MLK. Okay,
But
I didn't know that.
the
Interesting.
actual line is the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice,
Right.
which is arguable. But
But I think that's you.
well, let me put it this way: I think if you look at the long sweep of the history of the human species, I think that it bends toward better than it. I think that if you lived 2,000 years ago, it probably wasn't as good as living now. And I think that there's probably it's not a just a straight line of progress. It's it's
Wavy line.
steps, and sometimes we fall back and we go up. But I mean, clearly, I could name a lot of ways, and it doesn't mean you should be complacent that there aren't things that we need to do a lot better about, but it does also mean you should have some context. I mean, I think that I don't know. I think it would be nice. It would be cool. We talked about this when we talked about the time travel thing once. It would be cool to visit the 1920s
I was going to
and
bring
see
this
what
up.
that would be like. But I don't really think, if you think about it, you'd want to live there.
That's the Outlander thing, that show on
I mean, I
Netflix that I
don't
call
really think
softcore
you'd want
porn.
to live
Oh,
there.
I love Outlander.
I know, but
I would go
there's
through the stones for Jamie in a heartbeat.
well, sure,
I don't
because
know
it's
what "go
softcore
through the
porn.
stones" means, but it sounds cool.
But the idea of going back to is that the 1600s or the 1700s they go back to?
1700s,
From
yeah.
the 1950s or something,
Yeah,
after the
no,
war, or
that's- yeah.
40s or something. They go from the nurse goes back, and I actually think, for me, it's so implausible. I mean, obviously it's implausible. It's time travel, but I mean, implausible the way she
I'm
responds.
glad that it's
to it.
implausible to you.
The way she
That
responds
makes
to
me
it,
feel
because
better.
I think most people today would just have internalized things like, I can go get antibiotics, or I can,
Yeah,
or
you're
I
not
can
gonna
get a tooth.
die
I can get a
at
tooth.
the
I'm not
age.
gonna exactly from an
You're not going to
abscess.
die at the age of 34 because you're too old or
Right,
something.
right.
We
know,
started watching American Primeval on Netflix.
I have heard about that. What do you? Oh, it's very
Holy
Is it horror?
graphic
wow.
Western, right?
It's Western. It's the
It's
Indians.
American West, but it's really
also
graphic.
about the Mormons.
Right.
Ooh.
And
Ah.
fighting the U.S. government
Right.
and and it is so gory. I mean, it
Oh.
is full on. And so when you talk about the antibiotics, where some of these people are getting the junk beat out of them, and I'm like, yeah, you're gonna die. You're not gonna make that.
Well,
right. The bludgeon is one
regrettably,
thing. The
we are
infection
all
is
going
another.
to die, Shelly. But
yeah, but
But it's going to be a really horrible death, it sounds like,
Really
from what
horrible.
Shelley's.
yes.
Yeah.
yeah. I like.
I
Oh, no.
personally want to live forever, but it's not going to happen. But I have a better chance
Why?
now.
Why? There was just this is fascinating. There's just an article in yesterday's New York Times
I saw
about
that.
how men are obsessed with trying to live longer. It's all men.
Okay. I'm a man. What can I say?
Okay.
I don't
But
know.
why? Tell me why you want to live
I
forever.
just
This is
because for me.
Well, you don't believe in afterlife.
Well, I
You
don't believe in
an
afterlife. If I believed in an afterlife, maybe I would feel differently. But I don't know that only men don't believe in the afterlife. But well, I just, to me, it's all FOMO. I don't want. I'm gonna miss out when I'm dead.
But you won't know what you're missing.
I
Exactly.
understand that, but that's the whole point. When you miss something, you don't know what you're missing. That is the point. You fear of missing out. That's what FOMO is.
Well,
If you knew what it
well, I
was, you
always
wouldn't
thought-
be missing out, right?
You won't have the fear because you won't be allowed
I have
to
the
feel
fear now. I have the fear. I don't want to miss what's going to happen.
And just for our listeners, you can probably guess Jim was the one who also talked about regret.
Right.
Absolutely. I regret everything, including
no.
everything I've said in the last 54 minutes. I
Okay,
regret
Edith.
everything. I
Okay,
have
Edith.
Regret the
nothing but regret.
restaurant we went to the other night.
Beth, I regret that I was there with Beth because I feel like that was a
Harsh.
here's the mistake that I made, which is that so we're going to see Our Town, which was wonderful. We saw Our Town on Broadway with Jim
Awesome.
Parsons and Richard Thomas and Katie Holmes.
Oh.
Envy,
Terrific
envy, envy.
cast. I'd never seen it on the stage. Beth had never even read it, which I thought it was against the law. I thought it had to be taught in every high school in America, but apparently that's not the case. Uh, anyway, so it was terrific. The play was terrific. So we're
Great.
going. It's at the Barrymore on 47th Street.
Oh, I'm gonna
Um,
cry.
So John and Will and I had eaten
Your
at
sons.
this restaurant that is right across the street from the Barrymore. And it was
Okay.
great. It was terrific. Food was good. The service was good. It
Of
was
course, it's
great.
New York.
Wasn't even super expensive for New York purposes. So I said, Beth, if we're going to eat, what about this place? And I think I sent you like the menu or something. And she said, it looks good. So I made a reservation. We got there. It's like a 7 o'clock curtain. So we're eating early. What I didn't notice,
We both missed.
we both missed, but but the one who suggested is John and Will and I had gone there on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon. I can't
Okay.
remember which.
Ah.
Between 5 and 8 on weeknights, they have singing. Like all the waiters sing. They come and sing to you at your table.
Oh, how fabulous.
So you got
Well,
a
no,
pre-show.
no.
I can tell you right
They can
now.
say they're on Broadway singing, but they're not on Broadway singing.
So I can tell you right now that some people, like if I'd taken you to that restaurant, John, you would have been fine.
Oh,
That was not Beth Shannon's
And it was
idea of a
so
good
loud.
time.
Oh my God, you
It
couldn't
was
hear.
kind
I
of
had to
loud.
leave. I was getting a headache.
So I feel very regretful about making that recommendation. Obviously, now, like I said, it depends on who you're with, everybody different strokes for different folks. Some people would have enjoyed that.
Oh, everyone around us loved it. They were taking
I know there were a
pictures
lot
with
of
their
people
waiter or
loving it.
waitresses. Yeah.
I was like,
Well, it
oh
probably
my
gave
God.
you greater appreciation for our
My
town.
thought was Beth will never come into New York to visit me again now.
Or
because
go
of
to the
this.
restaurants you recommend.
Well, I mean, I don't care about that. I mean, I'm not like big on like you have to go to where I want to go, but that was my thought.
I would have eaten that a lot. Oh,
Oh
so
yeah, you would have.
delicious.
That
Candy.
would have been great. Now that if
Candy.
you're in New York, I might take you there
Yeah,
deliberately,
yeah,
John,
right.
because you would probably like it.
Of course.
And I know other
Oh.
people would, but Beth is not one of
Oh,
them.
No.
God.
I think I
You
know her well
can't
enough
get
to
that
know.
anywhere on earth.
I have to
you
say,
can get that nowhere.
there are things about Beth I find unpredictable, but that is not one of them. I would have predicted that would not have been a good place to have taken her had I known about the singing waiter. So
That's funny.
there are some things about Beth I find unpredictable, but that is not one of them. So what do you think Peggy's big regret is? Since she's not here to defend herself.
I think missing tonight's episode.
I think that's quite possible.
That is perfect. Yes. I think that's good.
I think actually Peggy may have talked about that once before in a different episode, which you can get by checking us out on iTunes or Stitcher
or your favorite podcast.
I don't know.
Or your
Can you
streaming service.
Can I ask you a question? A serious question. Are the episodes we did under the former title, are they still available?
They're all available. Jim, if you use Google.
Okay.
Google the subject.
Now tell
put
me,
your name,
how do
my
you
name,
spell Google?
and it'll come
for
right
that?
up.
Can you tell me how to spell Google? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean they'll
okay.
come right up.
Okay,
they're
all right,
still
that's fine.
there. They're all
I was just curious about that because when I said I was saying before that I actually stumbled upon one that was saved on my computer, an old episode, and that made me wonder about that. So
Yeah. Well, so let's do the last counterfactual each. So if you weren't doing this as a creative outlet, what would you be doing?
Writing a book, a novel.
Oh man, well,
I
then
think you
this was
should
a
wait the
mistake.
novel and give this
Oh
up.
my God. No
I'm saying
kidding.
right now,
Mic drop.
I want to read the novel, Shelly.
I started it. I have started it.
Oh,
I
excellent!
just-
How far along are you?
I ghostwrite.
Wait a minute. How
I-
much of you not getting the novel done is the podcast, and how much of it is Ian? Let's be honest here.
No, I stopped writing it before Oh no, I was writing it since I met Ian. I'm trying to think when I stopped. I go in fits and
2
starts.
minutes after you
Yeah.
met Ian. That's
No,
my guess.
no.
That's when I'm putting my
I have
money on.
to I have to be in the right mind frame.
So put
and have the
chapter
right-
1 on the website. We can talk about it next episode. We'll put chapter 1 on the website, and you can talk about it next episode.
I would
It's
not
so
do that if
poorly
I were
written.
you, but
No.
that's all right.
Come on,
No.
Shell. Dive in. Just
It's
dive
kind of
in.
it's kind of dark.
I'm sure that's what
I love it
memoirs are.
already. I love it. I
love it
want to
too.
read this.
Me too.
I'll send you a
But I'll wait
snippet.
till it's finished, Shelly. You don't have to put chapter 1.
Oh no, I'll take whatever I can get.
John is, he'll start critiquing it and telling you what you have to
No, I
change
will
and
not.
all
I am
that.
the most supportive
Oh my
editor
God.
on earth.
You won't even let us talk without telling us to move the microphone and turn up the gain.
That's because he wants
I
us
want
all to
our
sound
beloved
well.
listeners to be able to hear
he's
us.
going to want your book
Exactly.
to read well, and that's going to be the same impulse taking over, Shelly. Take my word for it.
So, Jim, what about you? What would be
Yes.
your creative outlet if not this?
I would be sitting here staring at my computer wondering what to do. I would have no creative outlet.
Regrets.
Yeah.
Je regrette everything.
I'd be like, why aren't there people that would do a podcast with me? What am I doing?
How about you,
what I
Beth?
would-
Well, I've made a goal this year is to see more live music and live entertainment, but I will obviously we're not recording weekly, much to Jim's dismay, but I
Yeah,
think
I
with
think we
our
should
current
record
recordings
hourly. What are you talking about?
schedule, I can fit in live music and the podcast. So I'm not quitting you guys.
Good.
Excellent.
Nice.
And
Nice.
John?
I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd just probably be writing more. I mean, I did that other podcast for a while, but the thing I like about this is it's, the cycle of, even though I'm bad at releasing them, the short cycle of recording and releasing and recording and releasing, it's way better than when I take on big things like a novel or, a major project or a website or something huge. Because that's
Where's your novel that we can read the first chapter of, John?
Sure, I'll put it up anytime. Yeah. All right.
Shelly has to go to bed.
Let's
All right.
close out. Who's doing the closeout today?
Jim can.
John,
All right,
you
Jim.
should do it. You should always.
Okay, I'll do it. So I have some big news.
Uh-oh.
I think, so our web hosting thing automatically feeds to Facebook and I think X, but I'm going to turn those off. I think
Excellent.
I have committed to us only being on Blue Sky. Blue Sky is a very good, to the extent any social media is good. We could talk about this, but the end of it is, I think Blue Sky is a delicious platform that serves our needs. And for those of you who do want to get in touch with us that way or be in touch on social media, that's a great thing to do, and it will make my life a lot easier. So we're on Blue Sky, and we'd love to hear from you there. If not, call us. You all have all our numbers. Just call us or text us. We'd love to hear from you. We love doing these shows. We love hearing from you. We love feedback of any kind, as much as you can give it. So please give us some, and thanks, and we'll try to get into that weekly rhythm.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.